Okay, thank you everyone. Appreciate your patience. Welcome to today's webinar, Say Goodbye to the Bundler with Release and Rollback for NetSuite. My name is Scott Daniel. I am the Director of Marketing at Strongpoint. We appreciate all of you taking the time to join us for this first webinar of 2019. This is the first in a series of webinars that Strongpoint will be hosting throughout the year. Before we get started, I will quickly run through a couple housekeeping items, and then we can dive right into today's session. Today's webinar is being recorded. All lines are muted. We will conduct a Q&A at the end, so please use the question function at the bottom right corner of your panel and ask any questions that you have. This function will be available throughout the webinar, so feel free anytime during the webinar to post any questions that come to mind. We are excited about today's webinar. This one is based upon new functionality that is currently in beta that will truly be a game changer and address a pain point we've all been dealing with for years. Today's presenter is Mark Walker, who is the President, CEO, and founder of Strongpoint, and he will review this new functionality, the hows, the whys, and also run through a demo followed by a Q&A, all of which are submitted by you. As you can tell, we have a full agenda. I believe one that will be educational, thought-provoking, and entertaining. So let's just get this going. Mark, you're on.
Great, thanks, Scott. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your day to spend some time with us. This is new functionality that we're going to be talking about today, and it's something that we started to roll out. Really, the idea of about 4 or 5 months ago with our customer advisory board. And we sat down and we talked about how we could get to the next level in what we do. So what I'm going to do, we have a blend of different people that have signed up for the webinar and are attending. Some people know Strongpoint really well. Some of you may be new to Strongpoint. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of an overview of who we are, what we do. More importantly, I think what we believe and what we aspire to do for our customers. And then we're going to walk through the reason why we created this new integration, and then we'll do a demo and show how it works. So as we mentioned, my name is Mark Walker. I'm the President and CEO. This company was built entirely driven by my own experience trying to manage change at pace, running a high-growth software company, and prior to that actually working and leading one of the larger NetSuite consulting firms. And one of the ways that NetSuite helps their customers achieve more year after year after year is to build amazing things like the software development framework that what we're going to be talking about today is based upon. But the other way is by partnering with companies in the SuiteArt program, such as Strongpoint. And when we actually first started going down this path, we approached NetSuite and we worked hand in glove with them at every stage along the way. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about some things, some challenges that exist in the NetSuite platform today. And when you think about the sort of things, if the solutions we're proposing, if you like them, don't just think of us, think of NetSuite as well. We've done an amazing job. And please excuse my voice. I've had a cold for about 100 years here. Okay, so for those of you who are new to Strongpoint, I just want to give you a quick overview of what it is. Strongpoint is an integrated set of tools for managing cloud-based applications, particularly NetSuite. And it, excuse me, and it blends automated documentation and optimization tools with intelligent change management tools. And then layers on top of it, a layer of enterprise compliance. So in an ideal world, we would know everything about our NetSuite account. We would keep our NetSuite account as clean and as well organized as conceivably possible in order to drive as much productivity from our teams as we possibly could. We would make really excellent decisions very, very quickly and be super responsive to the business about what was safe to change and what level of change control we need to run through. That's intelligent change management. And then we would have that completely auditable and be able to not only audit things, but actually be able to validate in real time on a continuous basis whether we were following our own practices. Now, not all of our customers need all of those parts. Our public customers certainly use the enterprise compliance with its integrated segregation of duties, with the ability to block changes to assignment of unsafe user roles, and the ability to block changes to certain parts of master data. But, excuse me, but many of our customers, also our non-public customers, will use the documentation optimization and the intelligent change management piece. What we're talking about today is really a change in how the intelligent change management piece is going to be working that serves both the needs of people who are just basically trying to move forward as quickly as possible, as safely as possible, and also those people who need to achieve compliance objectives. The big idea behind Strongpoint was that it was conventionally thought that what made you safer made you slower. And that's certainly true, right? Rigor requires expertise, and often the risk level of making certain things happen is so high that you want to distribute that risk and have lots of eyes on it. And this causes bottlenecks and slowness. But our big idea was, right, that's only true if you have human beings doing all the heavy lifting. If you flip it around and said, wait a second, what if we had software doing all the heavy lifting, then actually what made you faster could actually make you safer. And what made you faster could also make you compliant. Because one thing software is really, really good at, it's keeping track of all the things that went on between the approval of a change and the finalization of a change. So we sort of built out these capabilities in kind of the order that they're listed here. Automated documentation that can do as good a job as the very best people would ever do in the world, but didn't just include information about dependencies and things like that, but also about organizational risk and usage and things like that. And then the ability to do risk analysis so that people would be able to get an answer really quickly. This is low risk, this is high risk, this is extremely high risk, and be able to map that onto change processes. And then be able to do impact analysis, which we'll be looking at today. So it'll tell you what you need to be worried about and whether or not there's any dependencies you haven't thought about. In some cases, this is the rate limiting step. Gartner has shown over and over again that many of the requirements that businesses have don't get built because the cost of the impact analysis and the people that are required to do it exceeds the value of the individual change, even though the changes in total would be extremely valuable to a business. And then we built out automated change monitoring, automated approval routing and verification, so the making sure the right people approve things. We then integrated that with Jira and ServiceNow, so many of our customers are using us in combination with those products and doing all of the sorts of things we just talked about directly from within Jira and ServiceNow as part of an overarching structure. And then automated change clearance, making sure that every single change actually went through the process it was supposed to, and highlighting to management non-compliant change. And then finally, automated control monitoring for financial and master data controls and automated segregation of duties that's integrated right into the employee record. The whole philosophy is cut the waste, cut the fat, and do exactly what a human being would do if they could do some things at incredible speed. But customers came back to us and they said, we just want one more thing. And actually, you didn't have to be a long-term customer to want this. It came up in almost every discussion we ever had with customers. They said, can you actually move the objects between accounts using Strongpoint? And the other side of that coin was, can you actually stop the objects from moving between accounts using Strongpoint? And for a long time, the answer was we can't do that. The APIs aren't available, and we're not able to offer that capability. So we built a lot of capabilities that went around that. But so our customers were left with three choices, and the choices that they had were not ideal. They had the choice of manually migrating things. So having human beings actually go and take each object and manually rebuild it in the target account. And this is tremendously time consuming. It's tremendously error prone. And it was and very difficult to coordinate, and it was expertise based. So in order to do a proper job, you either needed a it was very difficult to have lower skilled release engineers do this, because in fact the activities that were going on were really redevelopment. You take what you did before and then develop it again, only on the fly in a production account at 3 o'clock in the morning. And really the Strongpoint's ability to do environment comparison became incredibly important in helping people do the manual process much better. But without Strongpoint, there was really no governance on this other than restricting who could make changes at all. And that wasn't necessarily efficient. So the alternative was the bundler. And the bundler is a very successful technology, even though almost everybody who ever used it, including the people who built it, have had significant troubles using it, right? And the reason was because NetSuite was trying to build something that was safe to use, but in order to make it safe to use, it had to put some assumptions in there that made it very difficult to configure. So it was difficult and time-consuming to configure. It certainly required a certain amount of expertise to do so properly. It was imprecise, right? It is imprecise. Often often deliberately including related objects that you didn't actually want to move, and causing consternation that way. In some cases, it would produce unpredictable results. And NetSuite's worked really hard. I don't want to at all throw the bundler team under the bus. There's a whole team at NetSuite who worked really hard to make this technology both accessible and stable. But nevertheless, it's trying to do a lot of jobs in one and to make approximations of them, and that causes some difficulty. And finally, other than the fact that only administrators can make bundles in most environments, anyway, there was no governance on it. So you guys think there's no governance or too much governance, depending which way you think about it, or both. And so that's a big challenge. So frequently we would talk to people and say, we use manual migration because we don't trust the bundler. And we trust the bundler. Strongpoint is built on top of the bundler, but those bundles are managed by professional software engineers whose entire job is to manage, to build code and to manage those bundler packages. Now, in the past 2 years, NetSuite has introduced the NetSuite SDF, and it's an excellent tool. And I won't actually be demonstrating SDF because we're those of anyone who's interested in SDF, you can go and learn about all the amazing capabilities that it has that are very, very useful. It's a huge improvement. But in order to move things between accounts, it requires admin access. And in order to build projects properly, it requires a very high level of dev skill. I would say less dev skill than would be required if you didn't have the SDF, because the SDF has many helpful tools, but still it's not meant to be used by administrators and most functional consultants. And if you look at the world of NetSuite experts, a recent Anderson Frank study said that less than 3% of the NetSuite professionals are certified developers. So we have a lot of uncertified developers out there, but that may be causing us some concern about quality, although I know some excellent people who've never gotten around to getting certified, in fact, many of them. But what we're trying to think of is how do you make a tool that has the benefits of what SDF can do, but has a governance model and is much easier to use. So until now, obviously hundreds of companies use Strongpoint, and they use it right now because the deployment validation, the environment comparison deployment validation, and the automated change clearance, the reconciliation of changes onto the change request, provides a substantial governance model, sits on top of it. But it doesn't really solve any of the other problems. It doesn't solve the actual. Well, it does help with the manual migration because the environment comparison will tell you what's different about the objects so you can fix it, which definitely helps people get things done quickly and effectively. And it does allow you a validation to make sure that you did it, that now the the source system and the target system are now identical after you made the change. That's good, but it still has some continuing challenges. So, and most importantly, it wouldn't block any unauthorized changes, and until now. So what we're going to be showing you is Strongpoint release and rollback. The big emphasis is actually going to be on the release behavior. In this part, we'll do a separate session on rollback, on rollback strategies and different types of rollbacks, positive, negative rollbacks, and things like that in a separate upcoming session. But what we wanted to bring was the best of the NetSuite SDF and the best of Strongpoint, and use them together to produce something that was easy to use, was fast, more accurate than the bundler, or manual, I suppose, that enabled people to build projects by searching rather than build projects by coding, because most people are unable to build projects by coding, and it's much faster to build projects by searching than to build it by coding in many cases. And then that still supported, that took the environment comparison and impact analysis capabilities that Strongpoint has, that includes information about relational differences that you might not, that are maybe indirect and are more complex, and includes warnings about organizational risk, like don't change this, it's been recently used, sort of things, and then layer on top of that an approval-based governance model, right? So we're going to walk through some of the key features, and we're previewing it now. We're expecting the release of this to be at the beginning of Q2, and we do have, so as I mentioned, this was a very popular topic with our customer advisory board, and we have quite a number of beta customers signed up. But if any of you in the middle of buying or considering buying Strongpoint right now, I'd encourage you to get started and use all the other features that so many other companies are using, and then layer this on top. This system is built around the way in which you would use Strongpoint as part of your change management rubric, so you really need to get that laid out first. So we'll be rolling it out first, of course, to people who already have a laid out change rubric and are therefore ready to fire for effect, I guess, as the Army says. So we're going to be walking through creating an SDF project automatically from a simple change request, so actually automatically generating a project, ensuring that the development environment is the same, so doing impact analysis and comparing, understanding our context in seconds, right from within the SDF environment, pushing changes to the development environment, so you're having differential permissions allow you to make changes to dev environments quickly, but put restrictions on other environments, and we'll be talking about how those can be accomplished. Therefore, blocking unapproved changes, and then requesting approval and successfully deploying production code, even if you're not an admin. So somebody who doesn't have any admin rights in production, although in the example I'll be using, so I can do all the parts, I will have admin rights. They will have the ability to request a deployment, but not. But they won't be able to actually make the deployment until that request is approved. And then we'll be covering off some other important use cases having to do with syncing data. All the other attributes of SDF that relate to projects, such as the ability to store projects in Git and the ability to bring them down at an appropriate time, those capabilities, which are normal software development framework capabilities, will remain true. I won't be demonstrating it today. So let's pop over and take a look. I'm going to walk through this from a change request forward. So we're going to start off that somebody has a problem, and we're going to talk about what they would have to do without release and rollback, and what they would do with release and rollback. So the first case, for those of you who have never, this is the standard change request. We'll be seeing a more advanced version of the change request that's just coming out towards the end of this talk. But this is a standard change request in Strongpoint. And so this object might exist actually in NetSuite, or it could also exist in Jira, or it could also exist in ServiceNow. And it has the same capabilities. And in this case, somebody has said they've identified a problem. It originally came from a process issue. Somebody reported a ticket saying that our pivot report portlet is not working. And the pivot report portlet, apparently takes data from this search and displays it inside a portlet. And right now the problem is it's not showing any data, right? So the first things we can do right inside Strongpoint today is understand what the risk level is. And this would have already surfaced in the process issue right away. You can see that in order to make this change, because of our policies, you need to have a full software development lifecycle. So which means that you need to have a formal approval to do it, and you need a formal approval, you need to develop it somewhere else, and you need a formal approval to release it. And the details of what companies do in that, it varies. In some companies, it's a multi-environment, so they're actually syncing, they're making the change request follow all the way through as they move from environment to environment. And in other cases, it's simply, they may just simply have one environment. But the key thing is a formal request for approval. And what's driving this is the scripting and the dependency of the scripting on this search. If you had a field or a non-scripted field, you would have a different level of change. You could have organizational risk. If some safe searches have no regression risk at all, so you could go and change them in production. We don't care. Some safe searches, you would need to get approval from management, but you don't need to get the dev team involved. This safe search, if you were going to change it, you would need to get the dev team involved to regression test this. And the important thing about this is Strongpoint would catch this risk even if you just put the search on here. And more to the point, even more important than that, Strongpoint would catch it even if you didn't do this whole process at all and you just change the safe search. So for those of you who are not familiar with Strongpoint, that ability to identify the risk and automatically flag it and automatically say there should have been a deployment record for this because it should have gone through this process is a completely different thing. I'm not going to cover that in detail today, but it's a fundamental part of the engine. So in this case, somebody's asked for approval and they have, and they're already able in the change request to do a bunch of things. As we mentioned, they're already able to go in and they can request impact analysis. So they can say, okay, I'd like to know whether or not there's any unusual risk associated with this. And so Strongpoint right now is just simply checking and saying, is there any unusual risk? And the impact analysis says, look, the pivot report doesn't really have a problem because you actually already have its dependency already in scope. So it'll say you're good to go because you don't have any missing dependency that you need to be worried about. But strangely enough, the search is not that safe, and it's just warning you about an organizational risk. This thing's being actively used. Somebody's actually looked at it. It turns out the person who actually looked at it was me as I was getting prepared for this presentation. But the system has automatically caught that and said, look, somebody's actually recently looked at this, so think it through, right? Be careful if you're going to change this thing because people looking at the data. In this particular case, we already know that. And a good example of this would be, you're going to think about changing a field, and it'll warn you that this is risky. Other warnings we commonly see are warning people, say, hey, this thing has a dependency on a managed package, so if you change it, it won't necessarily stay that way. Object-specific warnings that have to do with, you've got a field in scope, and maybe you haven't archived the data, you haven't signed off that you put an archive of the data, so if you're changing the field, you might fry the data. Things that are built right in. The other thing we can do in this environment is say, well, I wonder if the environment, I'm going to go develop this in dev now, I wonder if the dev environment is the same. And it turns out the dev environment is not the same, right? The script files aren't the same. And I'm going to skip a couple of steps to be quick here. You can run a comparison, just the objects in this scope. Of course, you can compare almost everything inside NetSuite using Strongpoint. Excuse me. But we can actually go in and actually see the file diff. And we can say, oh, I see, okay, so if we were to overwrite this, the target has a different size and it has a different field, so a different search rather that it's using. So if we were to go in and just tell a developer to do this, they wouldn't necessarily know that, right? They might go in and they might go ahead and develop it and not realizing that the environment was different. Okay? So, so so if we were going to we now have to move some of these objects from one place to another. And the way that one would traditionally do that, let's go back to my bundler here. This should be where I need to go. Right. So somebody would go and they would create a bundle. And the irritating thing about doing this is you're never going to use this bundle again, one would hope, right? Because presumably you're only going to push the objects into dev once, and then you have to make a new bundle in dev and push it back, right? So you're going to have to go through this process twice. And so they go and they create it, and they go and skip this step because entering anything here is a waste of time because we're only going to use it once. Very useful for people like us, where the same mechanism is used for managed bundles. And then they're going to go through and select the objects. Now, if you remember, the only two objects that we wanted to move were the support script and the search. But in fact, the bundler is going to enforce that we also move the transaction body fields. Now, this is not such a big deal when we're moving from production to dev, but could be a very big deal if we have multiple developers working in an environment and we're moving back. So we can have situations where entire custom records get moved, and this causes release problems that can be quite substantial, right? So the reason why, by the way, that the bundler is doing this was to facilitate, during a time period when there was a lot less NetSuite expertise, people not migrating things in that were definitely going to fail. But in this case, we have, even if we take this out, if I go into the custom fields and go to transaction body fields and go find this thing, promise date, and I take it out, I go next, the bundler is going to put it right back in. And there's no way to get it out. So now what has to happen is that whoever's going to move this, if they're moving into dev, has to make sure that nobody else is working on anything else in dev that might be affected by moving this, overwriting this field. Is the field does it even need to be migrated? Maybe they're exactly the same. They can use Strongpoint to figure that out, but they have to go back and repeat their process. And when they're finally done, they end up with a bundle that is only available to administrators that have access to their account. So it can't actually be used by anybody other than an admin. So if you've got some developers who don't have admin rights, so they might have admin rights in the target system, they can use the bundler to move it in, but then only administrators can be used to move it back. So this causes bottlenecks and other problems. In our world, when we wanted to actually add things in here, I don't think we're approved right now, right? We're not approved. When we wanted to move things back in, we can simply go in and search like you would for anything else, right? So I'd like to add this field or add this field. In this case, I don't want to add any of those things. So really super slick, super smooth. You have access to the normal interfaces for doing this. And I'm going to show you at the end of this some totally new things that allow you to search based on what changed when and object type and all sorts of other things that make it very, very easy to do this. Once we have done this, we can approve it. Now, normally the approvals are going to need to be done by somebody else. In this environment, I'm able to override approvals. Actually, administrators can always override approvals. It just creates an email that I'm going to get dinged with, just came in on the system. All administrators will get told, hey, so-and-so just override the approvals. That may be pragmatic, but it's also potentially problematic. And now what we need to do is we can now generate our project by downloading it from the SDF. And so I pop open the SDF bundle, and what it's done is it's built the project and put it in a zip file. And I can go down and save this file onto my downloads folder, and then I can go and open it up in Eclipse, which I've already done right here. So now what it's now done is it's built the project, that somebody would normally build in Eclipse, that a developer would build in Eclipse, but anybody that can use this. It's already being built out for us. And you see it's got the XML definition of the script and the XML definition of the search, and it's got the actual code of the script itself. And this, if you are using SDF, you can go off to the races, and you can now use the SDF, and you can now build on top of this project and use it in its normal case to build out the rest of your project. Prior to doing so, though, you can actually do some comparisons. So one of the things I can do is I can do impact analysis. And in the interest of time, I can still do it. I can pick any environment. I can say development environment, and I want to check impact analysis. And the impact analysis comes back right away. And it says, look, be careful, that script file was not the same. So you don't need to tell somebody, oh, by the way, you need to make sure that you sync the environments. I can now go in and I can say, I'd like to now deploy these objects into my development environment. So I can say, I'd like to deploy this, and you can control these permissions. So you can say, and you can do this in Strongpoint now. You can say, I'd like to deploy this into development, and I can press OK, and it's going to reach out through the SDF and push these objects into the environment. And it takes a couple of seconds, but it's still a heck of a lot faster than building a bundle and then communicating with somebody. So now we've pushed it into the environment. So so now we can go in and we can say, oh, well, actually what I'd like to do is I'd like to make this 480 pixels, and I can change the script reference if I want. I can do whatever the heck I want, right, to this, and I can save it. And as I did that, I could deploy that to my dev environments, and I can do my testing, and then at some point I'll be done with my project, right? And so I will save my work, and I will say I would like to now deploy this. But this time, I'm not going to pick our dev environment. I'm going to pick our working environment here, which in this case is our production environment. So I'm going to pick this what we're treating as a production environment. And I'm going to ask to deploy this into production. And it's going to immediately say, no, you don't have an approved deployment of the current project. So you can't, it just completely blocked it. And without this, you'd be able to push it in, but Strongpoint would be able to, Strongpoint would report only that the fact that you didn't have an approved deployment and therefore that you were very bad and that was dangerous. But if it was code, there's a danger that it actually has already started to do something. So it could affect, for example, your data. If we wanted approval, we can simply request a deployment. And I have to keep remembering to such a project. And request a deployment. And so I go in and say, okay, so update of portlet script to address problem data. It's a relatively minor change. And then we can say we change the size and updated the comments or whatever we did, right? Updated the code. And by the way, this doesn't apply. I'm just doing it on the script because it's really easy to change scripts, but you can do this with any object that SDF allows you to manipulate. So you could have changed anything in this, or you could have actually gone into the development environment, changed the search. You don't change searches directly in SDF, but you could change the search and then sync it back, and we would be able to update it. And completed testing. Okay, and we'll see how we see test records in a second. And so I'm able to then say, okay, I'd like to request this this approval. Now, if I go back into our change request, refresh it, there will be a new deployment. A new deployment request sitting here, and here's our update of portlet script to address problem with data. Now, the fact that this is being created doesn't mean that I can now push into production, because this is not approved. The approval status is nothing, right? Now, normally, the approval status will be driven by the object. So it'll say, you need a deployment record. This is a deployment record. So far, so good. It's tied back to the parent change request, so we know where it came from. It's got the notes that we had in place. It's got the objects. It's now become part of the history of these objects, is their deployment history, what went through the process to approve this. And we can now go through, and normally this would route for approval. In this particular case, we're just going to approve it. So we're going to go and approve it, and now we will have an approved deployment record, right? And again, it says, hey, you just approved it without going through the normal process. And we can now go back into our Eclipse environment, and now we can deploy to, if we remember to pick a project, now we can deploy to a working account, and it can actually deploy the objects across. Again, it takes a couple of seconds, but we didn't have to go and build another bundle and do all the other things that we need to do in order to get something migrated across. We just need to press the deploy button and wait for a few seconds while it does it. It's now validated. It was able to update the portlet and the save search. And if you notice that at the same time, it double checked and made sure the script deployment came through. So that it was, you have a script and you tested it. Well, presumably you want to make sure the deployment is the same as you tested, just in case you change the deployment at the same time. And if you go back in now to our environment, you need to log back in, because all the changes are being tracked as if we did it specifically. We're able to go back in to our change request, and the changes have now been pushed through into the environment, and are valid, and our deployment is complete. Right? So, so that is the root capability, the ability to generate a package from a change request without requiring very much or any technical expertise to do so. The ability to then use that package to move things through, but have the system be looking at the objects and saying, no, 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 you need this level of approval in order to move things from place to place. And the change requests that do this do not have to begin in production. You could actually have a functional developer working entirely in a sandbox account, and they're ready to make some changes, and then they want to create a change request purely for the purposes of requesting deployment permission and then using the framework to push it through. An example of this, I'll show right now. Okay. An example of this is our new ITGC change request. Some of our customers are starting to adopt. It's got a slightly different layout, but the important and super sexy thing is what you can do with it. And you can start to look up customizations. So say you've been working in an account, and you can say, okay, I'd like to see anything created by Alex after this date. I have no idea if there is anything created by Alex. So let's go anything that, let's leave that aside and say, oh, actually, all I'm concerned about is the user roles. So I want to sync user roles between two environments, bingo, boingo, pick them up, add them to the change request. And what this means is you can search, you can say things with only the script ID, things with, and you can repeat searches, right? So you can build it by saying, okay, I want, let me see, look, let me use anything that changed after date X, which is, if you think of all the objects you could possibly add to a change request, unless you're playing whack-a-mole with your sandbox environment, it's going to be a very limited things if you select a time frame during which the change actually occurred. And you can actually, by the way, select things from other accounts as well. So you could pick a different environment and use that to specify the IDs that you wanted moved across and so on and so forth. The normal case, though, is selecting the environment that you're working in. So what this means is, we repeatedly hear people saying, great, Strongpoint, your environment comparison can tell me whether or not my user roles are out of sync, or your environment comparison can tell me whether or not I have fields or other objects that have been created in one environment that haven't been moved over to the other one. Very, very important during implementations or large project rollouts, being able to identify this stuff, but you haven't given us any tools to actually create the bundle and force that through. And so, so now we have that capability, and when these two things, this capability will be rolling out, in fact, it is rolling out right now. Different customers already have access to it. Once we blend it with the release and rollback, then we will have the full enchilada. You'll be able to basically search for the differences between environments and then actually sync those using the SDF framework through the Strongpoint release and rollback extension. Okay, so that's mostly what I wanted to get through. And what we're trying to, the real thing about this is massively higher productivity, because everything that somebody is doing that requires expertise is a bottleneck, and everything that somebody's doing that requires them to follow a very multi-step process to do it in the way that you do with Bundler is time consuming. And then we also want to be able to do something that causes automatically resolved compliant changes. Because when Strongpoint actually, when you make these changes, when Strongpoint catches them, if you have an open, appropriate change request or deployment record, Strongpoint is going to mark those things as compliant changes. If you don't have one, it's going to mark it as non-compliant changes. But the big thing about our new capability is you can take away admin rights from people who are developer-y and say, look, you have the ability to have admin rights in Sandbox, but you don't have any admin rights in production, and they can still actually push things through, even though the approval was only made by business people. So no actual admin bottleneck in the middle, although normally you might want to have your admin sign off on this stuff. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I know that we have some questions about this. Please, Scott, maybe if you can walk us through the questions and sort of see if we can answer any of them.
Okay, perfect. Again, I'd like to remind everyone we have the dialog box in the bottom right corner, and you can submit all questions. We currently have one. Can you also push to and from Sandbox?
Sure, you can actually push to and from any environment that you have. Well, you can make a request to push from any environment that you have at least Strongpoint developer role access to, which would mean your sandboxes, or higher. So obviously full access or admin access to those things. You could even push, in theory, from environment A to environment B, where one is not a sandbox of the other.
Excellent. Okay, another quick reminder, if there's any questions, we have Mark on the line. He's happy to answer any questions you might have. Again, this is in beta. We're very excited to announce and launch this. So there will be more information coming. Looks like we have some questions coming in. Mark, so in SDF today, internal IDs on script parameters are account specific, and I manually update these in the target environment. Is there a way to manage this here?
Sorry, coughing. Not because of the question, just because I have a cold. The short answer is I don't know. But I would like us to grab that, Scott, and make sure we have Dan Kish, and I will get one of our subject matter experts to walk through that. Essentially the objective will be that the answer is yes. I'm just not sure when we will cover it. So basically anything that you could do manually, our system is intended to do automatically. So for example, SDF doesn't necessarily deal with safe searches quite the way that we might want to deal with them, particularly if you're changing them. We have new capabilities for dealing with those things as well. So any of the bottlenecks that you don't have to do manually, Dan, we will look for ways to do that automatically, because we completely control what we're pushing in and why. But I'm actually heading down to meet with the team that's responsible for this later this week, and I will promise we will get an answer back for you on that.
Excellent. Okay, next question. Can you preload custom records with data and then include them in the package for deployment?
And that will definitely be part of the released version of this, yes. Yeah, that definitely. So important, because of course custom records can be preloaded with data, effectively function as configuration in many, many circumstances, and you want to move those simultaneously. By the way, there already are tools in Strongpoint for actually moving that stuff. There already are tools for migrating custom records from place to place for that reason and validating them. That's already a capability that we already have, but that'll be part of the framework as well. Are all component types supported? So yes, all component types that SDF supports will be supported. So if we have to go through the SDF SDK, so as the SDK, NetSuite's objective is to roll out 100% coverage. We will support that. But if there's a component that's within the project scope that's not covered, our environment comparison and migration validation will continue to be very important for those, since we cover, for example, an example of that would be somebody who was being reminded that they needed to update preferences and they had not done so, right? So the preferences were in scope, but the preferences were changed and they're not the same now. And so the environment validation, until we have complete coverage, which may be some time, the combination of this plus the ability to run environment validation, so compare the objects in production and sandbox in seconds, will be really important.
Okay, that looks like the last question. Again, there's one last chance to get a question in, otherwise we will conclude today's webinar. Looks like we are good. So this concludes today's webinar. We would definitely want to thank you for attending. This is going to be one of many webinars Strongpoint is going to be sponsoring throughout the calendar year of 2019. And I look forward to presenting to you again.
And including some more detailed run-throughs of this as it gets closer and closer to go live, as we'll be going into some more specific examples dealing with very specific use cases.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you everyone. I appreciate your attendance, and we will send out a follow-up email with the recording of this webinar, and feel free to reach out, and please keep your eyes open for the following webinar announcement. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.